The wind had a way of speaking on the plains, long, low, and endless. It curled through the tall grass like breath, carrying dust, the scent of dry sage, and the faint echo of the evening train whistle from miles away. The church on the hill waited in that stillness, its white paint flaking under the heat, its bell tower leaning ever so slightly as if tired from all the weddings and funerals it had seen. Inside, it was quiet, save for the restless shifting of boots on wood. The people of Dry Creek weren't known for patience, and tonight, their curiosity burned brighter than the candles by the altar. Luke Calder, the cowboy no one truly knew, was standing at the front of the church, hat in hand, jaw set, his eyes fixed somewhere between the wooden floorboards and the door. He was a man of few words, the kind who built fences and buried kin without complaint. And now, he was getting married to a woman nobody had ever seen before. No one could quite say how it came to be. Some said he'd ridden for a mail-order bride. Others whispered about a promise to a dying friend's sister. But whatever the truth was, the town came to see it. The women came with curiosity, the men with half smiles, and the children with wide eyes, hoping for something exciting in the dull rhythm of ranch life. When the first creak of the door came, the whispers died. She stood there in the frame, one hand clutching the side as if to steady herself. Her dress was the kind you'd find folded away in a trunk, something once fine, now faded. Dust clung to the hem where it had brushed against miles of road, and the lace along her sleeves had torn in places. Her veil was crooked, pinned hastily, and her hair had fallen in loose, tired strands around her face. She was breathing hard, not the breath of fear, but of someone who had walked far and carried the weight of it. Then the townsfolk saw her shoes. They were old, maybe once white or cream, but now scuffed to gray. The right one had a split down the front, so wide you could see the dirt-stained stocking beneath. She hesitated at the threshold, her eyes sweeping over the crowd, faces lined with pity, judgment, and whispers hiding behind polite smiles. "Lord," a woman muttered under her breath, "she looks half dead." Luke's eyes lifted. He saw everything the others saw, the torn shoes, the dust, the exhaustion, but where they saw shame, he saw something else. Strength. He'd seen it before, in horses too proud to break and in storms that tore roofs clean off but left the roots of trees untouched. She didn't flinch under the weight of their stares. She stood still, breathing through it, clutching the small bouquet of wildflowers she must have picked from the roadside. The preacher cleared his throat, his old hands trembling slightly as he gestured her forward. "Come on up, miss," he said gently. She took one step, and the broken sole of her shoe flapped against the wood. Someone in the back snorted a laugh. Her cheeks burned red, but she didn't stop. Step after step, she came down the aisle, her heartbeat thudding louder than the whispering crowd. She didn't look at Luke, not yet. Halfway down, her veil caught on a splintered pew, tearing a little more. She tugged it free without looking up. The church felt too small, too hot, the air too thick with judgment. When she finally reached the front, she stopped just short of him. For a moment, she looked down at her feet, those shoes that told the story of everything she didn't have. A soft tremor ran through her hands. Her voice, when it came, was barely above a whisper. "I'm sorry," she said, eyes still on the floor. "They broke on the road." Luke's silence stretched long enough for the wind outside to press against the windows. The preacher shifted uneasily, ready to speak and smooth things over, but Luke moved first. He took one slow step forward, then another, until he was standing close enough for her to see the lines weather deep into his face. He looked down, at her shoes, the dirt, the miles she'd walked, and then up into her eyes. His voice came low and steady, like the calm that settles before rain. "Then you've brought everything." The words landed between them, soft but certain. She blinked, startled, unsure she'd heard right. Around them, the church fell into a deeper silence. Luke's gaze didn't waver. He said it again, slower this time. "You've brought everything that matters." Something inside her shifted, something small, like the last lock giving way on a long-closed door. The tension in her shoulders melted, the tightness in her chest loosened. She raised her eyes to meet his. For the first time since stepping off that train, she allowed herself to breathe freely. The preacher cleared his throat again, though this time with a smile ghosting across his weathered face. "Well, then," he said softly, "shall we begin?" Luke gave a single nod. She did too. The ceremony began, simple and slow. The preacher's voice carried through the room like the hum of an old hymn. The bride repeated her vows with a tremble in her tone, but her eyes stayed locked on Luke's, anchored there as if afraid to drift. When the time came to exchange rings, he slipped a small silver band onto her finger, nothing fancy, nothing new, but it gleamed like something sacred. And when he said, "I do," he didn't speak it like a man performing a duty. He said it like a man making a promise to a soul who had already proven herself before a word was spoken. Outside, the last light of the sun bled through the church windows, turning the dust in the air to gold. It caught her hair, her dress, the rough hands that held hers. The congregation watched, some smiling softly now, others still whispering, but none daring to interrupt what had quietly become something real. When the preacher announced, "By the laws of this land and by the grace of heaven, you are husband and wife," Luke didn't rush. He simply reached out, lifted her veil, and met her eyes with a calm that spoke louder than any kiss could. For the first time in years, she smiled, not the polite kind people wear to survive, but a smile that reached her tired eyes and made her look, for just a moment, entirely unbroken. Luke took her hand, rough fingers closing over hers, and turned to lead her down the aisle. The crowd parted without a word. The door creaked open, and they stepped out into the open evening, where the last light waited to meet them. Her torn shoes sank slightly into the dirt road as they walked away, side by side. But this time, she didn't look down. And though the road ahead stretched long and uncertain, she carried in her heart the sound of his voice, soft and steady as the plains whined. "Then you've brought everything." The night came quiet over the plains, the kind of stillness that made a person hear their own thoughts too clearly. The moon hung low and pale, brushing silver across the wide, sleeping land. From the small house on the ridge, the only light came from an oil lamp burning low in the window. The wedding guests had gone hours ago, their wagons leaving trails of dust that shimmered faintly in the moonlight before fading into darkness. Only two souls remained awake in the hush that followed, the cowboy and his new bride. She sat on the porch steps, her wedding dress pulled around her like a forgotten promise, her bare feet tucked beneath the fabric. The torn shoes sat beside her, broken and dusty, as if they'd lived a whole life just getting her here. The air smelled faintly of coffee and mesquite. From inside came the gentle clatter of a cup being set down, then the slow creak of boots on old boards. Luke stepped out into the night, his coat gone now, his shirt sleeves rolled up past his forearms. The man didn't move with ceremony, everything about him was quiet, grounded, the way the land itself seemed to breathe. In one hand, he held two tin mugs, steam curling upward and vanishing into the cool air. "Here," he said, offering her one. She took it carefully, the heat of the metal seeping into her fingers. "Thank you," she murmured. He nodded and sat down beside her, the boards of the porch groaning under his weight. For a long moment, they didn't speak. The night stretched wide before them, the low hum of crickets, the faint rustle of grass, and somewhere far off, the lonesome cry of a coyote. Luke leaned back against the post, eyes fixed on the horizon. "You ever been this far west before?" he asked finally. She shook her head, her voice soft. "No, I've never been this far from anything, I think." He gave a small, quiet smile at that. "It's different out here. Takes some getting used to. Land looks empty, but it's not. You just gotta learn how to listen to it." Her eyes followed his gaze into the distance. "I'm not sure I've ever had time to listen to much," she said. Luke didn't press her. He just took a slow sip of his coffee and let the silence stretch again. It wasn't the uncomfortable kind. It was full of breath, full of the sound of the earth settling for the night. When she finally spoke again, her voice was lower, as though confessing to the dark itself. "I didn't expect anyone to still want me." He turned his head slightly, his expression unreadable in the half-light. "Why's that?" Her hands tightened around the mug. "Because I've failed at more things than I can count. Because I've been left behind more times than I should have survived. Because," she trailed off, glancing down at her bare feet. "Because I didn't even have shoes fit for a wedding." Luke's jaw tightened just a little. He set his cup aside, then crouched down beside her. Without a word, he reached for her right foot, and she stiffened, startled. His hands were rough from years of work, hands that had mended fences, branded cattle, and buried men, but his touch was careful as he lifted her foot into his palm. "Don't," she whispered, pulling back slightly. "They're dirty." He shook his head, holding firm but gentle. "So's everything worth keeping," he said simply. He brushed the dirt from her heel with his thumb, tracing over the small cuts where the shoe had rubbed raw. The gesture was unhurried, reverent almost. When he looked up, his eyes were soft, no trace of pity there, only quiet understanding. "I don't have much to give you," he said after a while. "The land's rough. The days are long. I've got no fine dresses for you, no fancy place to take you. But I can promise you one thing." Her breath caught, the moonlight catching in her dark eyes. "What's that?" "That you won't have to walk to anything alone again." Her lips parted, but no words came. For a moment, all she could do was stare at him, the warmth of his hand grounding her in a way she hadn't felt in years. She swallowed hard and looked away. "You don't even know me," she said, barely above a whisper. Luke eased back, resting his elbows on his knees. "Maybe not yet," he said. "But I know what it takes to get where you did today. I know the look of someone who's run out of everything but grit." Her throat tightened. "You make it sound like something to be proud of." He glanced at her with that quiet, steady half-smile again. "It is." The night wind picked up, carrying the faint smell of wild sage from the hills. She closed her eyes, breathing it in, and for the first time, she didn't feel the familiar ache of fear behind her ribs. "I didn't bring anything with me," she said after a long pause. "No dowry. No family. No, nothing." He reached beside her, pulled off his own boots, and set them gently by her torn shoes. "Then we're even," he said. Her brow furrowed, confused. He shrugged. "I didn't bring much either. Just myself. Seems fair enough." The simplicity of it hit her harder than any grand gesture could have. She looked down at the boots, well-worn, scuffed from years of work, soles patched more than once, and then at her ruined shoes beside them. Together, they looked like two halves of the same story. "Why did you say yes to this?" she asked suddenly, her voice trembling with the question she'd been holding since morning. "To me." Luke was quiet for a moment, watching the moonlight stretch over the dry earth. Then he said, "Because I got tired of talking to the wind." She blinked, confused. He turned to her, eyes steady. "Out here, you spend a lot of nights with no sound but your own breath. I figured it was time to share it with someone who knows what silence feels like." The words sank deep, soft and steady. She felt something in her chest loosen, a long-held ache easing at last. Her eyes burned, but she didn't look away. They sat like that for a while, two strangers tied together by something neither could name. The stars hung endless above them, the world stretching out wide and wild in every direction. After a long while, Luke stood and reached out a hand. "Come on," he said. "You need sleep." She hesitated before slipping her hand into his. His palm was rough, but warm. He led her inside, past the low glow of the dying lamp and into a small, clean room with a single bed. He paused at the doorway, hat in hand. "I know it ain't much," he said quietly. "But it's yours now." She looked around, the plain walls, the handmade quilt, the smell of cedar and earth, and somehow, it felt more like home than any place she'd been before. "Thank you," she whispered. He nodded once and stepped back toward the porch. "Get some rest, Mrs. Calder." When the door closed, she sat on the edge of the bed, staring down at her bare feet. The tears came then, quiet and soft, slipping down her cheeks before she could stop them, not from sorrow, but from the strange, unfamiliar weight of being seen. Outside, the wind carried the faint sound of Luke's boots on the porch. She thought of his words again, "Then you've brought everything." And as she drifted toward sleep, her heart began to believe it might just be true.